Hey guys, tonight we're dialing back the clock to a time when beauty meant something totally different and honestly, kind of bizarre than what we're used to today. Imagine a world where a crooked nose was considered sexy and a giant chin could land you a knight in shining armor. Yeah, medieval beauty standards were a wild mix of practicality, superstition, and the occasional fashion nightmare. So, before you start feeling superior about your no-blemish skin or perfect pout, hit that like button if you enjoy seeing history's craziest beauty trends. And in the quiet hum of a 13th century marketplace, young Elswith paused near a mirror hung lazily on a wooden stall, her reflection catching the flickering glow of midday sun. She dreamt softly of marriage, perhaps to a kind knight or a gentle craftsman, without giving much thought to the strict beauty ideals whispered through town criers. Meanwhile, the daily rhythm of merchants bargaining and children chasing geese continued undisturbed, as if her simple hopes were part of the fabric of ordinary life. The market's eyes, painted for practicality rather than vanity, observed without judgment, sensing that beauty was a fleeting thing, easily lost in the dust of a long day. Somewhere behind her, a woman adjusted her coarse linen dress, unaware of the silent standards that would soon seep into Elswith's dreams. As news of noble court fashions wafted through the town, the crier's voice rose, describing women who possessed pale skin, high foreheads, and impossibly long hair, standards so distant from Elswith's own sun-kissed face. Her heart fluttered with the quiet conflict of wanting to please and staying true to herself. But societal expectations pressed in like the heavy, warm air after a rain. Among the marketplace stalls, a pair of women with freshly washed hair and ruddy cheeks exchanged knowing glances, their laughter gentle, but tinged with irony. Beauty, after all, felt like a game played by people wearing masks of their own making. Elswith's gaze traced the shallow lines of her reflection, wondering if she could ever carve out her own version of grace amid the swirling tide of courtly ideals. Time passed, and the ideals grew more elaborate, a tapestry of dreams spun by voices unseen, prophets with faces blurred behind veils of shadow, their words echoing faintly in the bustling square. Elswith watched as a young girl near her, adorned with a silk ribbon in her hair, clutched a mirror of polished metal, mimicking the courtly airs she had overheard. The irony was gentle, how beauty, so prized, was often just a matter of light, shadow, and the stories people told about themselves. The market's colors seemed muted now, as if the world was quietly reminding everyone that beauty was a fleeting artifact, something to be admired, or perhaps ignored, in the slow passing of everyday days. Elswith felt the soft weight of her desires, knowing that her own reflection held neither high foreheads nor pale skin, but a quiet, honest presence, all its own. In the calm of the late afternoon, the town's rhythm settled into a gentle hum. The push and pull of societal standards seemed distant, almost like a faint echo carried away by the breeze. Elswith sat on a wooden bench, her hands resting softly on her lap, watching the children rest after their morning play, and the bakers pack up their bread. She realized the ideals she once thought so pressing were just stories, passages in a much larger, quieter story that she was part of without effort or ceremony. Behind the stall, the market crier's voice softened as he recounted the latest court gossip, his tone weary and knowing, like someone who had long since seen the world's insatiable hunger for beauty ebb and flow. Elswith appreciated the slow, steady reality of her modest hopes, understanding that true grace was perhaps something beyond the mirror's surface, something found in the small, unremarkable moments of her day. As the shadows lengthened and the sky dipped into shades of amber and ochre, Elswith reflected on the lessons woven through her quiet life, the fleeting nature of beauty, the comfort in simplicity, and the humor in human pursuits. The standards so loudly proclaimed in courts and markets seemed to lift like thin clouds, revealing the enduring truth that beauty was neither fixed nor everlasting. Sitting there, she felt a faint smile, a recognition that her worth was not measured by the ideals echoed afar, but by the quiet dignity of her genuine self. The marketplace grew quiet under the settling dusk, and the stories of ages past lingered softly, hinting that perhaps, after all, the most enduring beauty was simply the patience to wait, and the capacity to see the world as it truly was, slow, ordinary, and eternally human. In the quiet moments of dawn, Elswith's mother, a seasoned weaver with hands worn from years of work, gently pulled her daughter aside. The air was filled with the faint scent of linen and cold ash from the nearby hearth. With slow, deliberate movements, she shared the old secrets, how a blanket of lead-based powders could make skin appear luminous and unblemished, a practice both trusted and quietly feared. Elswith listened with wide eyes, curious about the strange powders and the promise of beauty that came with them. Even in this simple lesson, a sense of quiet expectation lingered, as if beauty itself was a fragile thread woven through generations. As days passed, the lessons deepened into routines that carried both hope and subtle tension. Elswith's mother carefully bound her daughter's hair tighter each morning, wrapping it in fine cloths to craft the flowing look admired by their neighbors. The sound of the loom and the tug of ribbon intertwined, as the girl endured small discomforts, pins, knots, and the tightening pull on her scalp. Ironically, what was meant to lift her beauty also constrained her with silent, persistent pain, all in service of a standard that barely shifted with time. The mirror reflected not just her image, but the weight of tradition that pressed quietly on her shoulders. In the waning light of evening, Elswith often wondered about the girls who looked so naturally unaltered, their faces free from powders and their hair loose and unhindered. The town's women nodded knowingly, but kept their smiles politely ironed onto their faces. The irony of these handcrafted adornments, the powders that burned, and the bindings that tugged, became subtly amusing to those who watched from a distance. The beauty they pursued was in many ways a formality, a ritual that masked the natural, leaving behind only the quiet hum of effort and the faint shadow of discomfort underneath. Somewhere within all this, a quiet humor intrigued her. How humans longed for perfection, yet accepted the small costs they endured. In the tranquility of her small chamber, Elswith's thoughts drifted. Her reflection was a calm, almost sleepy scene, her skin unnaturally pale, her hair wrapped tight and weighted down. She noticed the soft abrasion on her scalp where the bindings pressed, the faint glow of powder dust on her cheeks. Yet, amidst these sights, there was a gentle sense of calm, a recognition that perhaps beauty was a fleeting illusion, a story told softly through effort and silence. The dusty air seemed to whisper that life's quiet routines, however strange, held a strange poetry, an acceptance that felt both timeless and slightly humorous in its quiet persistence. It was here, in stillness, that she found a whisper of peace. Looking back, the whole look of medieval beauty, with its powders and bindings, was like a slow, shared joke, perhaps on humanity's desire for adornment, or on how stubborn traditions endure. Elswith's early lessons had become quiet memories that hint at human imperfection and gentle absurdity, a reminder that beneath the surface, all beauty standards are suspended in a delicate balance of effort and acceptance. Perhaps it was in these small, everyday rituals, binding ribbons, powders dusting skin, that one finds the true story of the human condition. A slow, sometimes humorous dance with the fleeting idea of perfection, quietly woven through the ages. In the soft glow of early evening, the village prepared for its annual feast, a quiet gathering where stories drifted through the air like faint smoke. Among the townsfolk, a traveling minstrel took his place near the communal fire, his voice low and steady as he recounted tales from distant noble courts, where beauty was measured by slender waists, delicate hands, and porcelain skin that seemed too fragile to touch. Elswith, leaning on her wooden bench, listened with mild curiosity, her eyes flickering with the faint glow of understanding, and something harder to define, perhaps a sense that beauty was merely a costume worn differently by each. The minstrel's words painted a picture of castles adorned with mirrors and silk, of courtiers scrutinized beneath flickering torchlight, all echoing the silent expectations of a long-gone era. As the storytelling wove its calm rhythm, the fire crackled softly, and the night inched closer, thick with the smell of bread and lingering questions about what in the world might truly be beautiful. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the stars began to prick the dark sky, Elswith found herself staring at her reflection in the shallow basin of water by her cottage door. She adjusted her simple cloth around her waist and ran a hand through her damp hair, feeling the familiar lines and curves, none of which matched the idealized standards the minstrel had spoken of. Whispered rumors had buzzed through the village earlier, hinting about a rival suitor who embraced more natural features, unshaped by the fashionable distortions of those noble stories. Elswith's brow furrowed gently as she wondered if her body was acceptable, not by her own quiet standards, but by some unseen, distant judgment. The moon cast a soft silver sheen on her face, highlighting the small imperfections, the honest details hard to polish with mirrors or manners. Despite the whispers, she took a slow breath, feeling at last the calm acceptance of her own unremarkable, genuine self. Irony settled quietly with the coming dawn, as the town awoke to the same old routines and subtle insecurities that had persisted for generations. The noble ideals the minstrel shared remained distant echoes, often forgotten in the busy chores of daily life, herd animals to tend, bread to bake, and children to soothe. Elswith caught herself examining her reflection again in the mirror of a broken window, her face lined with the days where, but strangely untouched by the fabrications cherished in faraway halls. Meanwhile, the rival suitor, whose embracing of naturalness was spoken of with soft humor, seemed less like a defiant rebel and more like someone simply at ease with himself. The absurdity of standards, so meticulously crafted and yet so fleeting, became quietly evident. Life, it seemed, was less about meeting impossible ideals and more about quietly enduring their passing shadows. As the days moved slowly forward, Elswith found herself walking through the village with a new sense of calm, her reflection now less a mirror of other people's expectations and more a quiet foundation within. Conversations flowed around her like the gentle hum of a stream, people exchanging small stories, notices, and familiar frustrations. She noticed the rival suitor more often now, his natural appearance unadorned, his smile relaxed and genuine, and wondered if perhaps true beauty was simply about the kind of ease that made everyday life less tiring. The elders, with their calm eyes and softly wrinkled faces, seemed to carry a venerable patience for the human frame's imperfections. In this mundane, unremarkable truth, Elswith began to feel a subtle kinship with her own body, an acceptance that was neither grand nor dramatic, but quietly sufficient. In the stillness of evening, when the campfire flickered and the stray cats curled nearby, it was clear that the story of beauty had perhaps never been more than a fleeting whisper, an illusion playing softly on the minds of those eager for ideal pictures. The faces of the prophets or rulers, always unseen and blurred by the light, reminded the sleepy village that true worth might hid behind ordinary masks, blurred by time and gentle shadows. Elswith, sitting quietly on her porch, felt a gentle humor settle within her. How fragile and distant those standards truly were. The endless human effort to shape or escape their natural forms seemed almost endearing in its quiet stubbornness. And so, with the slow turning of her thoughts and the faint hum of the night, she found a faint, peaceful humor in the idea that perhaps the most beautiful thing was simply being oneself, slow, unembellished, and quietly alive. In the quiet hours of a medieval morning, the town's marketplace stirred with a gentle hum. Women examined their reflections in small, polished copper plates, adjusting their linen veils and layering powders made from chalk and lead, staid rituals meant to evoke purity and nobility. The sameness of their faces, pale and smooth, seemed to whisper a shared desire to appear untouched by the muddy realities beyond the city gates. The faint scent of herbs and powders mingled softly with the cool air, creating an atmosphere both mundane and purposeful. It was a routine born from a long-standing standard, silent yet persistent, as constant as the passing shadows overhead. One day, amid the routine, a sudden rash erupted across the cheeks and necks of several women, their skin raw and inflamed. The town's healer examined the afflicted with a furrowed brow, whispering warnings of the powder's hidden dangers. The town council, summoned hastily, debated whether the pursuit of beauty justified the harm it caused. Skin broken, discomfort ignored, lives quietly disrupted. Elswith, a young woman observant but cautious, listened intently as voices rose in cautious concern and dismissive defiance. The irony was clear. A ritual upheld for spreading grace was now marring faces in an unmistakable way, forcing everyone to confront a harsh, unspoken truth about their ideals. In that moment, beauty's fragile veneer cracked open just enough for reflection. As days passed, the rash persisted, stubborn as the old stone walls that lined the town. Elswith approached her mirror with a quiet, uncertain gaze, feeling the rough patches against her fingertips, an unspoken protest on her skin. She watched as women continued to apply their powders, their faces blank in the mirror's faint glow, unaware or perhaps resigned to the irony. Some teased a faint smile at the spectacle of their silent rituals, half amused at human stubbornness, half weary, the heat of the powders, the sting of inflammation. These sensations became subtle reminders that beauty, once celebrated as an ideal, was now stubbornly intertwined with suffering. The town's endless routine now carried a deeper, almost melancholy humor. Gradually, the town began to settle into a new rhythm, less focused on the painted perfection and more on the quiet acceptance of imperfection. Elswith found herself resting her hand on her cheek, feeling the roughness as part of her story, not as a defect. Discussions about beauty shifted, slow and careful, toward acceptance and health, as if the community were waking from a long, sleepy dream. The blurred faces of prophets and saints receded into the background, their images cloaked in shadow, as the town contemplated the simple, honest notion that natural faces had their own kind of dignity. In the stillness, a faint, gentle humor emerged. Perhaps beauty wasn't meant to be perfect, but lived quietly amid the ordinary textures of human skin. The quiet recognition settled like dust, unspoken, but deeply felt. Looking back, Elswith reflected on how beauty standards, like the powders and masks, had always been fragile and fleeting, easily shattered by their own contradictions. The rash, once a sign of shame, had gradually become a reminder that true beauty might reside in acceptance rather than perfection. The era's pursuit of a pale, pristine visage now felt distant, almost comical in its earnestness, an ongoing human endeavor to control appearance, while life, in its slow, unrelenting way, whispered truths of humility. The town's slow, unassuming journey toward a gentler understanding echoed softly through history, a quiet testament to the imperfect, stubbornly human quest for grace beyond surface appearances. In the quiet days of medieval towns, beauty standards were once quietly dictated by simple customs and natural appearances. Women and men alike carried little more than their daily chores and modest adornments, often unaware of any ideal beyond their own reflection or kin. When reflectively observing themselves in plain water or polished metal, they found comfort in unembellished faces and modest garments. The idea that beauty could be measured by perfection was not yet a common thought, and perhaps that snug sense of ordinariness held a certain peace. It was all simply life, passing slowly, rarely hurried, often unnoticed, in hues of subdued earth tones and gentle sunlight filtering through arched windows. However, as time trailed on, small towns and cities grew more eager to emulate distant courts, where beauty seemed more like a contest than a quiet grace. Rumors of alluring ointments and brightly colored powders emerged, tempting those eager for admiration. But beneath this shimmer, a quiet tension grew, women and men applying thick layers, often with ingredients that smelled sharp or tasted strange, risking more than just vanity. When stories of the toxic cosmetics leaked into the town, a gentle but persistent call for change arose. A council was convened under flickering candlelight, and slowly the idea of banning harsher substances gained ground, quietly shifting the focus from external glow to internal health. Yet amidst these debates, Elswith, a gentle soul with a steady gaze, dared to speak her mind. A modest, courageous voice in a sea of superficial spectacle. Her quiet bravery inspired others to see beauty not as an external showcase, but as something rooted in honesty and well-being. Irony settled in as the very cosmetics meant to elevate beauty threatened to harm, making simplicity suddenly seem more valuable. It was as if the tide was turning, and perhaps even the most superficial of standards were starting to feel burdensome or absurd. The notion that health could be the new elegance simmered beneath the surface of everyday life, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. In newfound calm, the townspeople began to embrace simpler standards. Women returned to using their own clear skin, their unadorned faces looking both humble and genuine. Elswith, now slightly older, gazed into a small, handcrafted mirror, its frame rough, but carefully polished, seeing her unembellished self reflected back. She felt a slow, gentle warmth stir through her chest, not from cosmetics, but from a quiet sense of acceptance. The change was subtle, almost unnoticeable in the flow of daily life, yet profound. Beauty no longer depended on artificial enhancements, but on honest appearances. It was a small, human victory, perhaps just a flicker, but one that promised patience and persistence. And so, as she looked into that simple mirror, Elswith saw nothing more, a plain face beneath her simple linen headcloth, unaltered by cosmetics or societal pressure. Yet, there was a certain radiance in her eyes, a calm acknowledgement that beauty was neither fleeting nor superficial. The slow passage of time carried with it this quiet shift, an enduring acknowledgement that the human heart often values honesty over illusion. The town's standards, once rigid and bright, had softened into something more human and enduring. In the stillness of her reflection, she found a gentle truth, that true beauty, after all, might just be the quiet acceptance of oneself, just as one quietly contemplates mornings gentle dawn. In the aftermath of 1066, the Norman nobles arrived in England with a sense of quiet entitlement, carrying bundles of silk and fine cloths that rustled softly as they moved through the cold stone halls. Among them, the young tailor Aldrich watched with a measured patience, noticing how their garments shifted and shimmered under flickering candlelight. A silent declaration of new power. The Normans brought with them a preference for tighter tunics and foreign ornamentation, which contrasted sharply with the more modest Anglo-Saxon styles that had once dominated the courts. It was a slow dawn for fashion, a subtle invasion of textures and colors that seemed almost hesitant in their presence. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, an unspoken tension simmered as old customs rubbed softly against the edges of new ones. Each seemed stitched with quiet questions about identity and change. As the months unfurled, the clash of cultures became more evident, woven into the very fabric of court life. The Norman nobles, with their foreign silks and intricately embroidered garments, began to assert their aesthetic dominance, even if unwittingly, by the slight stiffening of tunic collars or the cautious layering of bright, unfamiliar hues. Aldrich observed the subtle shifts. A cloth with a sheen that caught the dull fireplace glow a little more readily. Designs that seemed almost to whisper stories of distant lands. But beneath the sheen, a patience grew, an irony at the slow acceptance of these new styles, which originated from different lands and different hands. These changes, modest yet persistent, made the court a quiet mosaic of old and new, stitched together in a tapestry of slow transition. Eventually, the clutter of new silks and tighter garments settled into a calm rhythm, as if the court had quietly given in to the steady hum of tradition. The vibrant foreign threads were now woven into the familiar fabric of courtly attire, almost unnoticed except by the most observant. Aldrich, now older, reflected on how the initial clamor of cultural change had quietly woven itself into the fabric of daily life, softening into the muted tones of routine. The textures felt less foreign and more like the gentle wear of time, a reminder that even the most deliberate efforts at change fade into the background. There was a kind of peaceful acceptance, a slow, sleepy acknowledgement that history, much like fashion, drifts forward with a gentle, unhurried breath. Looking back, Aldrich realized that the story of courtly dress was less about the striking moments of transformation and more about the quiet, almost invisible shifts that lingered in every stitch. The foreign silks, once boldly introduced, had become part of the tapestry of the court, unremarkable, yet undeniably present. The slow evolution of fashion reflected a broader human rhythm, an ongoing, patient weaving of identity through small, quiet choices. In the stillness of fading light, he considered how history often slips by in subtle gestures, leaving behind a trail of softened edges and muted colors, as unassuming and enduring as a well-worn tunic. Perhaps, in the end, it was these quiet moments between the loud epochs that truly defined the steady, gentle flow of change. In the quiet months following the Norman conquest, Aldrich's workshop in London hummed with the subtle sounds of weaving needles and whispering conversations. The courtly fashion at the time drifted gently toward softer lines, as queens and noble ladies sought flowing gowns that caught the limited sunlight through castle windows. Aldrich, with his steady hands, watched over his fabrics, cashmere-like textures, and tidy silk threads, while the political murmurs outside his door remained distant, almost inaudible. It was an era when the art of dress was both a statement and a quiet ritual, slowly weaving its story into the fabric of everyday life. The soft rustle of silk and the faint scent of dye were familiar companions as he labored, unaware of the growing reputation that would soon follow him into uncertain times. As the years stretched forward under the uneasy reigns of Henry I and Stephen, the pace of courtly fashion shifted like a flickering torch in a shadowed hall. Patronage became a game of shifting sands. Queens demanded increasingly elaborate fabrics, and Aldrich found himself scrambling to keep up amid the rarefied demands. His workshop, once a humble space filled with the gentle hum of creation, now echoed with the distant clatter of looms and the faint whispers of suppliers fussing over rare textiles. Yet amid this tension, Aldrich's stitches grew finer, often stitched in quiet moments, while the political world outside meandered through its endless troubles. The fabric of courtly life seemed to stretch tight with expectation, almost fragile, almost fleeting, yet somehow demanded calm, even as the winds of uncertainty blew softly outside. Ironically, amidst the increasing complexity of the garments, the fabric of courtly fashion became almost a parody of itself, layers upon layers, embroidered with threads so delicate they seemed to vanish when looked at directly. Aldrich, watching from his corner, could not help but smile softly at the spectacle. The queens and ladies-in-waiting fussing over tiny ribbons, whispering about pleats that must fall just so, while the broader world continued its slow, indifferent spin. The fabrics, once simple and functional, had become a kind of silent protest against the chaos of the outside, a quiet, embroidered defiance. Yet, amid the intricate stitches and shimmering silks, Aldrich's hands remained steady, a reminder that even in absurdity, human effort persisted with each careful seam. The faint hum of the workshop felt like a lullaby for a world seemingly distracted by its own reflection. Calm returned gradually as the political disturbances waned, leaving behind the softer glow of candlelight and a more measured pace in the court's presentation of fashion. Aldrich's workshop, with its worn wooden tables and gentle piles of fabric, felt less hurried now, wrapped in a gentle silence that matched the aging stones of London's old streets. Queenly gowns draped comfortably on mannequins, their folds softly settling in the cool air, as if awaiting a moment more peaceful than before. The fabrics weren't as elaborate as in the past, but carried a quiet dignity, stitched with familiarity and a subtle pride. Aldrich, watching over his work with the faintest of smiles, reflected on the slow, unremarkable beauty of everyday effort, an enduring thread in the tapestry of history. In this stillness, one could sense that human routines, no matter how mundane, had a quiet kind of nobility all their own. Looking back from this gentle distance, the story of Aldrich and his gowns feels almost like a soft whisper across the centuries, a reminder of the small, constant gestures that shape human life. The early days of flowing fabrics and modest workshops gave way to layers of embroidery and political tumult. Yet, underneath it all, the quiet rhythm of daily work persisted. The blurred faces of kings, queens, and past patrons remain hidden behind the faded, unchanging textures of their garments, as if the human stories were stitched into the very fiber of history itself. Aldrich's journey, rooted in patience and simple craftsmanship, becomes a quiet testament to how even the grandest courts are made up of countless small routines. Perhaps, in the end, it's these unnoticed threads and gentle seams that truly hold history's fabric together, slowly, softly slipping through time's indifferent fingers. In the slow unfolding of fashion through the ages, the early noble courts admired the simple woolen cloaks and coarse linen dresses that marked their modest origins. As the Norman influence settled, richer fabrics like velvets and silks began to appear, their textures quietly whispering a new sense of grandeur. The courtiers, with their embroidered tunics and neatly laced garments, moved softly in their chambers, unaware that history was quietly stitching itself into the fabric of their daily lives. It was an era of understated elegance, where the subtle weight of a fine cloth carried a hint of aspiration. Yet, beneath the calm surface, the looming shadows of tradition and status woven into their attire held silent power over who belonged and who did not. As years moved onward, the Gothic style spread slowly across the courts, bringing with it more elaborate embroidery and the anticipation of new constraints. Aldrich, a diligent tailor, found himself confronting finer threads and more complex motifs, roses, leaves, angels, all stitched with tiny, deliberate stitches that seemed to demand patience. Fur trims, soft and warm, entered his workshop, eager to adorn the noblest of garments, but their luxurious appeal was matched by an underlying tension, an invisible line that separated the wearers of furs from the rest. At the same time, strict sumptuary laws appeared, like quiet guards on the wardrobe door, claiming the right to decide who could wear which collars and fabrics, making fashion a game of legality and subtle rebellion. Aldrich sensed that innovation was now confined within silent, unspoken boundaries, a quiet dance around legal textures and forbidden hues. Ironically, as Aldrich attempted to push the boundaries, perhaps by mixing a rare emerald green with a modest gold, those laws sometimes seemed to both restrict and inspire, drawing attention to the very limits they set. The fabrics he used were no longer purely functional. They became layered signs of social standing, each stitch carrying unspoken messages. The louder silence of the law meant subtle defiance in the way colors were paired or trims added secretly behind closed doors. Aldrich chuckled softly at the slow absurdity of it all, wearing humility like a fine embroidery, delicate but enduring. His workshop, filled with the scent of wax and wool, was a small universe where cautious creativity persisted beneath the weight of formal rules. Perhaps in this quiet act of innovation, an unspoken hope flickered, an acknowledgement that human desire for beauty would always find a way, even within strict confines. In moments of stillness, the courtly fashions seemed to settle into a calm rhythm, reflecting the quiet patience of those who wore them. Faint sounds, needle pokes, soft rustlings of fabric, the distant call of a herald broke the silence, blending into the slow dance of daily life. The colors on display grew richer, but always within the boundaries prescribed. A subtle, almost meditative conformity persisted. Aldrich, now older, watched with a gentle smile as wearers moved through their routines, their garments quietly announcing their different worlds, each stitch a tiny, peaceful rebellion against chaos. The law's iron grip softened in these moments, revealing that even the strictest codes could foster a kind of peaceful compliance, a harmony rooted in routine and shared aesthetics. In such stillness, one could almost believe that fashion had become a kind of silent meditation, a slow and steady stream of human expression within quiet parameters. Reflecting on this slow evolution, it becomes clear that fashion's true story was not merely about fabrics or colors, but about human resilience amid order and restriction. The embroidered motifs and fur trims, the law's subtle rules, all served as silent witnesses to a desire for individuality woven into collective tradition. Aldrich, with his needles and silk, had contributed to a story much larger than himself, a human act of slow rebellion, stitched into the fabric of history. The colors that dared to appear, sometimes in defiance, sometimes in harmony, reminded everyone that human imperfection and quiet humor often linger in the smallest details. As the ages passed, the gardens of legal threads and embroidered dreams quietly grew, shaping a story that, like all stories, was slowly unfolding in the gentle, unhurried rhythm of human life. In the stillness of an early morning, Aldrich, the couturier of the court, prepared his bolts of fabric and dyed threads, quietly contemplating the significance of colors that seemed to shimmer with centuries of tradition. The castle halls echoed softly with the distant clang of armor and muted footsteps as the grand tournament was slowly taking shape. For Aldrich, this was just another day of turning simple cloth into the symbols of loyalty and identity, an act of quiet patience under the flickering torchlight. The rulers and noblemen arrived, their faces blurred in the early light, shadows playing across their noble garments as they settled into the rhythm of the occasion. It was in these small acts, choosing a shade of crimson or a hint of gold, that history kept its slow, measured pace, unnoticed by most, but felt through every stitch. As the day wore on, tension rippled through the gathering. The clatter of weapons and shouts of encouragement filled the air. Yet, beneath the surface lay a different undercurrent, rivalries stitched into fabric and pride. Aldrich's hands trembled slightly as he matched colors and layered embroidery, aware that every choice might carry more weight than the eye could see. The favored knights arrived clad in their heraldic banners, each banner a patchwork of deeply personal history, and their ladies watched with quiet skepticism. A subtle prick of annoyance flickered when a rival's attire caught the sunlight more brilliantly, heightening the unspoken battle of status rather than combat. The fabrics, like whispered secrets, seemed to resist harmony, whispering quietly of the human desire for distinction, even amidst the mundane routines of the day. As dusk settled over the castle, the heated disputes ebbed, leaving behind a calm that was almost unnerving in its normalcy. The banners were replaced or mended, and the noblemen settled into quieter pursuits, drinking, talking softly, settling into the familiar rhythm of the evening. Aldrich, with a gentle sigh, sat back with a cup of wine, the embroidered threads now just fibers, reminders of days when fashion was both fleeting and fiercely defended. There was a gentle patience in the way the human story unfolded, errors mended, differences smoothed over, and the slow acceptance that no human effort is ever entirely perfect, nor ever perfectly understood. The constant hum of life persisted, as it always does, in the soft glow of lanterns and the fading light of shared human folly, in the quiet afterthought of the day, as pale stars, barely visible, began to flicker above the castle walls. Aldrich reflected on the passing spectacle. The colors, the disputes, the small imperfections, these were the true fabric of human history, woven carefully with intention and irony alike. He understood, in his calm, tired way, that fashion and pride are merely shadows cast by the human desire for meaning in the ordinary. As the night stretched thin and sleep beckoned, the garden's gentle breeze whispered stories of countless days lived in the quiet pursuit of self-expression, each stitch a silent testament to the subtle absurdity of human pride. There was peace, too, in knowing that the slow, imperfect march of history would continue, unnoticed and unremarked, much like the embroidered banners that fluttered softly in the darkening air. In the quiet hours following the Norman conquest, courtly fashion entered a slow, tentative phase, where the edges of imported Norman apparel brushed softly against native traditions. Tunics and chainmail gave way, at least visually, to layered linens and woolen fabrics, as if the courts were unsure whether to hold tightly to their old identities or embrace something new. Over time, the dress felt less like armor and more like a quiet conversation between different peoples, conducted in cloth and color. Yet beneath the surface, these changes stirred neither revolution nor great excitement, only a gentle shifting, like the sigh of a chair as it settles into a familiar shape, somewhere among the faint rustle of silk and the faint tap of a needle. History continued its slow, unhurried progress. As the centuries unfurled, the tension built imperceptibly. Courtly fashion grew increasingly layered and complex, echoing the burgeoning hierarchy that decorated castles and councils alike. Rich brocades and embroidery began to appear, woven with threads of gold that caught the flickering candlelight, almost as if trying to outshine the pride and ambition simmering within court walls. There was a quiet irony to it all, clothing that proclaimed modesty, yet whispered of status, all sewn with meticulous care, yet sometimes feeling like an elaborate concealment of vulnerability. The fabrics grew heavier, the sleeves longer, and the collars higher, as if the attire itself was trying to hide the human fatigue beneath. A subtle game was being played, one of display and restraint, a slow dance cloaked in silken pretenses. By now, the clothing had become an almost comedic canvas of excess, where practicality was sometimes buried beneath layers of lace and fur, and the lines between elegance and absurdity blurred just enough to evoke a gentle smile. The courts of noblemen and women looked more like intricate stage sets than everyday ware-stitched displays of wealth, with little regard for comfort. Still, the effort to look refined persisted, as if the effort itself mattered, even when the fabric touched the skin with all the softness of old parchment. Prophets or figures of sacred insight, their faces often blurred by light or shadow, seemed to nod silently at this quiet absurdity, aware of the human desire to adorn, to impress, and perhaps to momentarily forget the weight of the world outside the chambers. Amidst the ornate daily life moved with a languid grace, unhurried and gentle, like the slow unfolding of an evening dusk. Eventually, the style settled into a calm, more subdued harmony, a natural progression born from centuries of incremental refinements. The boldness of embroidery kept its place, but became less ostentatious. The heavy robes softened into flowing, more restrained forms, inviting a sense of comfort rather than show. This era's fashion reflected a quiet confidence, an acceptance that beauty can reside in simplicity as much as in adornment. In the quiet chambers, craftsmen carefully mended worn fabrics, and young courtiers practiced the art of modest posture, listening to the faint echo of history in their movements. The faces of prophets or sacred figures, ever obscured and distant, remained shadows behind veils of faint illumination, almost as if the true story need not be fully revealed. Here, in this peaceful stillness, fashion became a modest guardian of human imperfection and enduring grace. In the end, Aldrich, now an elder of the court, reflects on how this long arc of change, beginning with Norman imports and culminating in a native Gothic refinement, has quietly left a lasting legacy of grace. The slow evolution, unmeasured and almost unnoticed at times, has woven itself into the fabric of daily life, whispering stories of identity, aspiration, and restraint, passing his knowledge to the eager young courtiers who fidget slightly in their embroidered robes. He gently seals this story into the ongoing tapestry of history, perhaps not with grand proclamations, but in the quiet smile exchanged over a softly lit chamber. The true lesson emerges that human beauty is often found in the patience of ordinary moments, stitched together like the threads of a well-worn garment, enduring through the slow seasons of time. In the quiet village of Locksley, young Aelred, the miller's daughter, with sun-kissed, unruly hair, often sat by the river bank, marveling at the simple adornments that others wore: coarse cloth caps, plain linen, or nothing at all. One warm morning, she noticed a group of villagers gathering around a notice posted under the village oak, mentioning a royal edict. only nobles might wear gilded circlets. Her brow furrowed faintly. She had never seen such a crown, only heard stories from traveling merchants. The modest life seemed slow enough to carry old legends, yet this new rule hinted at some hidden old world hiding behind the mundane. Aelred's curiosity stirred quietly, like a mouse scurrying softly beneath the hay, sensing that maybe, just maybe, her simple hair held a story yet untold. Later that afternoon, she met Sir Rowan, the mismatched village knight, whose armor was dull, and whose eyes seemed to carry the weight of silent histories. They exchanged a few words beneath a low, overhanging eave, and Aelred asked about the edict, her voice as soft as the breeze. Sir Rowan, with a slow smile, lowered his battered helm and gave a shrug, hinting that perhaps the law was only the surface of something older, something rooted in a tradition nobody remembered clearly anymore. His voice was steady, but not dismissive, almost amused by the idea that headwear could symbolize more than just rank. The quiet chuckle of the wind, slightly misplaced, kept their words drifting into the background, as if the village itself was content to forget and remember all at once. As days drifted by, the story of the circlets grew into a quiet irony. How a rule meant to distinguish the noble from the common had, in truth, blurred all lines beneath the same sun. Village women continued to braid their hair, and men settled into their routines, unconcerned by gilded symbols that seemed distant and absurd. Aelred found comfort in the fact that perhaps the true nobility was not in what one wore, but in the quiet solidarity of daily life, still and slow, like the evening shadows stretching across the thatched roofs. She would sometimes laugh softly to herself, thinking of the king's edict as no more than a distant echo buried beneath layers of everyday chores. Here, in this slow village, history seemed more like a soft murmur than a loud claim, weaving itself subtly into the fabric of lives, unbothered by superficial symbols. One twilight, Aelred sat by her window, the faint glow of the setting sun catching the fringes of her hair as it tumbled untamed around her shoulders, free, ordinary, quietly rebellious. She pondered how people's perceptions shifted with the faintest hint of adornment or authority. Yet beneath it all, beneath any gilded circlet, was the simple truth of human ties and shared routines. Sir Rowan's words echoed softly. The tradition was perhaps more about memory, about keeping alive some old acknowledgement of kinship, even in the absence of crowns. The village, with all its familiar sounds, the distant hammer on metal, the faint roar of the mill, the whisper of wind, reminded her that stories lingered in small, silent ways, just like her own hair, unstyled and unregarded, yet filled with quiet meaning. In the quiet hours of early mornings, a young woman named Aelred sat by the loom, her fingers gently pulling apart threads of wool and silk. The village weaver's workshop was filled with the subtle hum of spinning wheels and the soft scrape of her needle as she learned how hair and fabric could carry silent messages of one's place in the world. Each braid she touched, each veil she studied, seemed to whisper stories of social rank. Thick braids for the learned, delicate veils for the married, feathers hinting at status beyond mere wealth. It was a tangled, silent language she began to decipher with careful, tentative curiosity, feeling the weight of history pressed softly over her shoulders. Still, amid these quiet rituals, the cloth carried an unspoken truth. Identity was stitched into every layer, every knot, as if her own place was to be quietly shaped by unseen hands. But as Aelred's skills grew, so did her awareness of boundaries. A subtle tension brushed against her like a thread pulled too tight. The guild was strict about what could be woven and worn, forbidding her from designing any ornamented or noble insignia. No matter how tempting the forbidden manuscripts she secretly studied at night suggested otherwise. Her hands hovered over patterns she dared not create. Each glance at an illuminated page fogged with longing and quiet rebellion. The law of her craft was clear. Such embellishments belonged only to those of noble birth, leaving her to hide her curiosity beneath humble fabrics and worn edges. Still, in her solitude, she could almost hear distant whispers of feathered hats or decorated braids, tangled with unspoken dreams of recognition that felt forever just beyond reach. Ironically, the very symbols of status she was barred from making, feathered hats, jeweled braid ornaments, became objects of secret fascination. In quiet moments, Aelred pored over the fragile manuscripts, her fingers tracing sketches of crowned heads and noble ladies whose hair was styled with care and adorned with tiny, shimmering beads. She found herself amused at the absurdity that her own craft, meant to serve humble life, was so intertwined with the aspirations of aristocracy. The more she learned about these secret symbols, the more she realized that hair itself had once carried bold messages, signs of bravery in battle, lineage, or allegiance, long before the guild's rules were laid down. The irony was thick. A humble apprentice caught between the old tailies of noble visibility and the strict silence of her craft's new laws. With each passing day, Aelred settled into a quiet acceptance of her place within these invisible boundaries, observing the slow rhythm of life around her. The sunlight filtered softly through small windows, casting gentle shadows on the worn wooden table where she worked. Her fingers moved with a gentle rhythm, braiding, weaving, hiding her midnight studies of the forbidden manuscripts, careful not to disturb the stillness of her world. Her thoughts drifted to the old stories of bravery encoded in hair and clothing, stories now muted by modern craft guilds, yet still alive in secret corners of her mind. Perhaps, she mused with a soft smile, the true measure of a person's worth was not in outward displays, but in the quiet knowledge kept hidden, like the secret passages woven into her own life. In the slow, dimming light of evening, Aelred closed her needle and looked at her simple work, her heart light with a touch of melancholy and quiet humor. Her craft was modest, her world circumscribed by rules, but her curiosity persisted, woven into her thoughts more subtly than any braid or veil. She understood now that symbols of status and bravery had always been shadows, fleeting and faint, cast by those who dared to wear their stories openly. Beneath the weight of social expectations, she found a certain peace in knowing that even the smallest threads, hidden beneath fabric or tucked away in old manuscripts, could carry the truths that mattered most. And so, surrounded by the hum of the evening, she continued quietly, content in her silent understanding of the stories woven into her life, and those she was yet to discover. In the slow hush of the medieval town square, Aelred delicately placed a modest wreath woven from wildflowers atop her head, the colors muted and blending softly into her simple gown. It was an unassuming gesture amid the splendor of more elaborate headpieces. Yet, during the annual festival of hues, even small offerings carried their own quiet significance. The townsfolk passed by, the distant murmur of voices, and the faint scent of bread lingering, unaware of the subtle act of individuality she had chosen. For a moment, her eyes caught the blurred outline of the prophets' faded faces, their unseen presence watching over yet untouched by the day's spectacle. Amid the gentle chaos, she felt a fleeting connection to the season's gentle change, rooted quietly in her choice of blooms. All was still, simply waiting for the festival to unfold, like a slow breath resting before a gentle exhale. As the festival progressed, the tension behind the scenes crept in quietly, stirred by the movement of the Lord's steward, who fixated on Aelred's wreath. His gaze lingered with a hint of suspicion as he approached, his voice low, yet edged with disdain. He accused her of usurping noble symbols, claiming that her wildflower crown threatened the hierarchy of display and the dignity of their traditions. The air thickened with unspoken judgments. A small, insignificant wreath became a silent symbol of potential rebellion in his eyes. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from anger, but from the uncertain weight of the moment, as if her quiet act had awakened an unseen conflict. though the crowd scarcely noticed the scene's subtle shift. The steward's plotting grew darker as he secretly considered how to claim the wreath, or her silence as evidence of defiance. A twist of irony settled in as the steward's suspicion seemed increasingly disproportionate to the humble wreath itself. A decoration made of wildflowers, after all, rarely signified defiance. He looked at her from across the gathering with a cautious, half-smiling disdain, his mind already spinning plans to seize the wreath, perhaps as a symbol to reinforce his authority. Yet the more he fixated on her modest decoration, the more absurd his notions appeared, like mistaking a whisper for a shout. The festival continued around them, indifferent to the silent power struggle that played out beneath the banners and cheerful songs. Aelred, with her quiet composure, merely watched him with a calm that seemed to drift on the breeze, unbothered by the accusations. The irony was subtly woven into the whole affair. The smallest mark of individuality could seem, to some, like the start of disobedience. But in truth, it was merely a gentle flower amid a sea of ornamentation. In the peaceful hours that followed, the agitation in the town melted away, leaving behind a gentle calm, much like the evening, settling softly upon the rooftops. Aelred tucked her wreath into her cloak, a humble act of quiet defiance that needed no further words. She observed the people passing, their faces relaxed, some smiling softly at the spectacle of painted crowns and decorated heads. The fleeting tension had faded into the background, replaced by the familiar rhythm of everyday life, the spinning of yarn, the sound of cartwheels, children's distant laughter. Her wildflower wreath, once caught in suspicion, now rested quietly on her shoulders, unnoticed and unthreatening, like an echo of spring amid the encroaching dusk. It was a reminder that sometimes simple acts of self-expression endure beyond the moment's conflict, silently redefining the boundaries of tradition. Reflecting on the day's events, one might see the entire episode as a muted story of human desire for identity, woven into the fabric of social expectations. The wildflowers, fragile yet persistent, whispered softly of individuality in a world eager for uniformity. Much as human stories drift quietly through the ages, unnoticed and understated, the blurred faces of prophets, now shadows behind the lightning sky, seem to remind us that authority and rebellion are often only separated by a thin veil of perception, easily disturbed, yet equally fragile. The festival, in its slow unfolding, drifted into memory, whispering of an ordinary conflict resolved in silence. In the end, perhaps, what remained was the small, enduring truth that simple human gestures, even as mild as a wreath of wildflowers, carry their own quiet weight across the endless, unremarkable passage of time. In the quiet mornings of a medieval hall, the nobles gathered around wooden tables, their heads crowned with simple wreaths of herbs or more elaborate circlets of gold, each symbolizing a fading but still present sense of honor. Aelred, draped in a fine mantle, carefully arranged her woven laurels, feeling the slight weight of history pressed onto her brow. It was a time when a woman's hair and headgear subtly conveyed her social standing, a language spoken softly through feathers, gems, and braids. The flickering candlelight shimmered against the metal of her circlet, a small but clear mark of respect and aspiration. Yet, beneath the surface of this quiet order, the undercurrents of ambition and desire for distinction fluttered like poorly tied ribbons, waiting for their moment to unravel. As the feast progressed, the atmosphere thickened with a mix of laughter, clinking dishes, and the faint rustle of silk and velvet. Suddenly, the steward approached with a measured step, his face unreadable, and in a voice that carried over the murmurs, announced that Aelred's circlet was to be removed, an act meant to remind all that humility was the true mark of nobility. Some heads turned slowly, the flicker of candle flames casting uncertain shadows on the condemned wreath. Aelred's eyes shifted, unsure whether the act was a reprimand or a signal of shifting power, a fragile role in a game of appearances. The crowd's quiet anticipation faded into an awkward silence, as if the room itself hesitated before accepting this new, unwelcome clarity. Just as the steward reached out to grasp the shining circlet, Sir Rowan, with no obvious hurry, stepped forward. His hand, weathered yet steady, paused in midair while he looked at the circlet with a faint, knowing smile. "This is not merely about metal and thread," he murmured, voice calm and even, "but about the old code forgotten, but never truly lost, where honor was shared through the simple language of hair and crown." For a moment, the room was silent, as if listening to the echoes of forgotten ceremonies. The steward hesitated, momentarily caught between duty and doubt. And then, with a deep breath, he withdrew his hand. Outside, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, as if the very sky wished to remind them of the fragile, fleeting nature of their glittering pretenses. Without any fanfare, a sudden gust of wind and a quick flash of darkness swept across the hall. And in that split second, the golden circlet was torn from Aelred's head, tumbling onto the cold stone floor. The room fell into a strange, contemplative quiet, broken only by the faint scrape of metal and the soft, hurried footsteps of courtiers retreating into normalcy. Aelred sat still, watching her reflection tremble for a moment before the storm outside seemed to absorb the scene into its quiet, distant roar. The glittering crown lay abandoned, exposed in the muted light like a forgotten relic of collective pretension. The fragile illusion had been shattered, not by open conflict, but by the slow, natural erosion of time and tide. Later, as the hall settled into the evening's calm, minds wandered back to that quiet storm, and the unspoken truths it revealed, that power, however grand, is often a fragile shell, easily disturbed by the simplest shift of wind or will. The women's hair, the men's cloaks, the humble wreaths, they all bore witness to a silent language, no longer entirely understood. In the slow hours that followed, the memories of glitter and storm seemed distant, yet oddly comforting, reminders of the inherent imperfection woven into these human displays of honor. Perhaps, in the end, it was the quiet humility, the acknowledgement of fragility, that held the greatest strength beneath mere surface shine. And with the shadows lengthening, the hall returned to its gentle, ordinary sleep, hopeful or resigned, subtle and aware of the truths that lingered just beneath the surface. In the damp shadows of medieval villages, heads were often the first thing to catch the eye, whether crowned, hatted, or simply bare. The swirl of fabric and fur signified more than warmth. It whispered stories of rank, loyalty, and age. Lords and ladies wore intricate circlets or heavy veils that subtly elevated their presence, while common folk sometimes sported rough cloth caps, quietly marking their place in the social fabric. It was an ordinary day when the old decree was challenged, and the village's quiet hierarchy teetered on the edge of change. The air held a subtle tension, as if everyone was waiting to see if tradition would hold or unravel without much fuss. Then came the tension, an unexpected edict, quietly passed through whispered councils, allowing commoners to wear simple head coverings, a small crack in the old order. Faces, once fixed in mild complacency, reflected surprise, uncertainty, and even a little mild annoyance. These garments had long been markers of separation. After all, the village, which had once viewed headwear as a badge of status, now wondered whether the new rule was a step toward equality or mere chaos. Still, people adjusted slowly. Cloth caps grew common, and their modest presence challenged the very idea of what distinguished one from another. Somewhere beneath the faint hum of change, the invisible walls of social hierarchy stirred and shifted, almost imperceptibly. Irony slipped quietly into the scene. What had once been a symbol of power became a matter of simple fabrics and casual wear. In the marketplace, a young man with a threadbare cap exchanged a knowing glance with an older woman's modest veil. The weight of centuries pressed downward, yet the garments were now more about practicality than prestige. occasionally, someone would chuckle softly at the incongruity. How a humble head covering could become a subject of such silent controversy. Small gestures, like straightening a poorly made cap or shifting a simple kirtle, betrayed the deeper absurdity. That centuries of meaning could dissolve into textiles so easily, and yet the world spun quietly on, unbothered, but forever changed beneath its humble coverings. Amid this quiet revolution, Aelred, once a lowly craftsman, was appointed as the village's herald of hair, an odd but fitting title. He wandered through the streets, observing and remarking gently on the stories woven into each braid and fold of fabric. His voice carried softly as he taught that perhaps the true crown was not on the head, but in the stories each person carried, a lifetime of small moments tethered together in curls and plaits. The villagers grew accustomed to this new perspective, their weariness replaced by a gentle curiosity. In the calm after the storm of regulation, there was a faint sense of rediscovery, a humble recognition that status was more quiet and intertwined than loudly proclaimed. Now, with the dust settling and the days lengthening, the village moved into a kind of gentle reflection. It was easy to forget the old hierarchies that had once driven division, replaced instead by the simple acknowledgement that each head, crowned or not, carried a quiet story worth honoring. Perhaps, in some small way, the decree had softened the edges of societal divide, if only just enough to allow for shared silence and modest smiles. Aelred's teachings lingered softly, like a faint whisper beneath the everyday noise, reminding everyone that the true dignity was in the stories they held, braided into their hair and woven through the very fabric of simple life. And so the village rested peacefully, with heads modestly covered or bare, all under the same indifferent sky. In the quiet hours of a 13th century town, novice Elinor wandered through the abbey's dimly lit infirmary, where shelves held jars of dried herbs and small bottles of strange oils. Her eyes lingered on a forgotten corner, revealing a cache of lightly scented powders and fragrant oils, softly gleaming in the candlelight. It was an unfamiliar sight, these items meant for beauty, concealed from the stricter overseers of modesty. A faint curiosity stirred within her, stirred by whispers of a secret art that promised to alter how one looked, even if only slightly. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and patchouli, an aroma both forbidden and oddly comforting. As the day pressed on in the steady hum of routine life at the abbey, later Elinor encountered Master Rowan, a traveling apothecary whose weathered face was partially obscured by the shadow of his broad hat. He examined her with a quiet smile, as if understanding her secret curiosity without judgment. As they spoke softly, he explained the complex hierarchy that mingled appearance and virtue in their world. How a modest shine or a gentle touch of color could silently influence one's social standing. He handed her a small vial of herbal oil, whispering about its secret power to brighten dull skin, yet warning that such practices danced dangerously close to vanities deemed inappropriate. Elinor's heart fluttered with a mixture of temptation and trepidation, aware that her innocent interest might defy both tradition and the watchful eyes of her cloistered society. It was a small act, but one that hinted at deeper layers beneath the simple cloth of her daily life. The irony of it all lay in the stark contrast between the solemn vows of humility and the secret sneaking of scented ointments into one's pocket. A quiet rebellion packaged in tiny glass bottles. Elinor found herself pondering this quiet paradox, realizing that even in a monastery grounded in restraint, human nature sought its fleeting moments of lightness, hidden beneath layers of modesty. Meanwhile, in the marketplace, women dared to dab a faint rouge on cheeks, or dabble in the subtle art of skin brightening, all the while aware of unseen eyes and hushed whispers. The soft hum of daily chores and hushed concealments wove quietly into the fabric of ordinary life, each small act echoing the human tendency to seek beauty, comfort, and identity amidst restraint. The world, it seemed, was never as simple as it appeared. Even in the most sacred spaces, human desires persisted quietly. In the gentle stillness of a dawn moment, Elinor carefully dipped her finger into the herbal oil, feeling the coolness seep into her skin as she thought about the world beyond these stone walls. The oils, powders, and gentle touches were just small acts, quiet, unassuming, yet quietly transformative, like a whispered secret passed from one hand to another. As she observed the abbey's routine settle into its familiar rhythm, she recognized that her own small act of curiosity was part of something larger, a human story of longing for beauty, acceptance, and the fleeting comfort such detail could bring. Perhaps, she mused, these modest efforts were their own kind of sacred, an acknowledgement that even in a life dedicated to discipline, the human spirit quietly sought reflection and a touch of grace. The sun's soft glow through the high windows cast long shadows, gently reminding her that patience and subtleties often held the greatest meaning. Now, in quieter moments, Elinor reflected on her discovery with a gentle sense of acceptance. These small gestures, trivial to some, were quietly woven into the human condition. Behind the blurred faces of prophets and saints lurked the universal desire to appear just a little more human, a little more alive in one's own eyes. Whether concealed in jars or spoken in hushed tones, the pursuit of beauty and hygiene remained a subtle, enduring thread, part of the slow, silent dance of human imperfection. In a world where even the purest intentions could be tinged with irony, she found a quiet comfort in knowing that her curiosity, like so many human quirks, was simply a part of life's slow rhythm. As night fell softly outside, the abbey turned still again, and she gently put aside her thoughts, aware that some stories, like her own, were meant to be quietly understood, never loudly declared. At dawn, the town market awoke slowly. Stalls set up with rough wooden tables laden with dried herbs, fragrant oils, and simple soap bars. Elinor and Rowan ambled through the labyrinth of voices and scents, noting how the air was thick with the smell of rose water and the faint tang of unwashed linen. Nobles, dressed in fine silks and gilded collars, applied delicate strokes of paint to their faces, their mirrors held carefully in gloved hands, as if makeup might ward off the weariness of the day. Meanwhile, peasants haggled over rough toothbrushes made from pig bristles, or exchanged small quantities of balm for their bare faces, their hands rough and stained. It was a quiet scene where ornament and necessity intertwining revealed the subtle class distinctions that had long persisted beneath the hum of daily life. A small crowd gathered near a soap maker, whose simple, fragrant bars were stacked high, their scent a gentle invitation. A noble lady in elaborate veils and embroidered sleeves paused to inspect her reflection, the merciless sun exposing a smear of dirt that the fine powders could not quite conceal. Nearby, a peasant woman rubbed a humble soap over her hands, her face blurred by the distant, soft light as she exchanged a few coins for a small bundle of herbs. There was a subtle humor in the scene, how the delicate craft of cosmetics was reserved for those who could afford to pretend they were not just animals of dirt and sweat, while others simply cleaned as best they could, with whatever was within reach. The market hummed quietly, a slow testament to human pretenses and practical truths coexisting beneath the same sky. As the sun sank lower, the marketplace quieted into a gentle rhythm, and the bustle of barter softened into a series of slow exchanges and measured looks. Nobles refined their touches. Palettes of powders and oils spread across their faces like fragile masks that shimmered faintly in the waning light. The peasants, exhausted but steady, returned to their routines, rubbing soap over their cheeks, tending to their small needs with quiet persistence. Elinor and Rowan lingered at the edges of the gathering, observing how the spectacle of cosmetics and hygiene were woven through daily life, each layer speaking quietly of status, hope, and necessity. The easy monotony of the scene, like a faded tapestry, reminded them how little had truly changed. Human life simply added new colors and textures to old patterns in the stillness of late afternoon, as shadows stretched and the market began to empty. A gentle understanding settled. The makeup, powders, soaps, and brushes were not merely tools, but symbols, a reminder of human attempts to forge identity and escape the mundane. For some, those colors and scents offered a fleeting illusion of beauty. For others, a simple necessity cloaked in quiet dignity. Elinor and Rowan slowly made their way home, their minds filled with the slow, unremarkable truth that beneath all adornments, life endured in its modest, imperfect form. The market's gentle hum faded into memory, leaving behind only a faint scent of herbs and the muted thrill of human effort, ordinary yet quietly profound. In the quiet courtyards and ornate chambers of the medieval palace, noblewomen gathered with delicate gestures, their hands smoothing fabrics and adjusting veils, as if shaping their own private worlds. Invitations to the court often arrived in tired, crumpled parchment, carried by slow, unhurried couriers. Elinor, an outsider with keen eyes and a soft curiosity, watched from a distance, noting the faint shimmer of powder on cheeks and the subtle blush of lips, evidence of the shared obsession with beauty. The air was tinged with the scent of herbs, wax, and a hint of something more chemical, as the ladies applied their secret preparations. It was an unspoken ritual, both mundane and profound, in which vanity and concealment subtly intertwined with societal expectation. Gradually, a quiet tension crept into the gilded halls when whispers of a strange illness began to circulate, linked ominously with the colorful pigments used in cosmetics. Some ladies fell silent as their faces reddened or swelled, and faint murmurs spread like a gentle ripple of concern. The court's healers examined the afflicted, their faces shadowed by the dim torchlight. But the cause remained elusive, an invisible poison woven into the pigments themselves. The queen, with her brow slightly furrowed, summoned her advisors for a discreet decree, demanding safeguards for the delicate, painted masks that adorned her court. The atmosphere felt suddenly subdued, weighty with the unspoken fear of beauty's hidden danger. In a twist of irony, the very art of adornment, once a symbol of elegance, became a subject of quiet suspicion. As the ladies looked at each other's faces with a mixture of envy and caution, a few artisans, previously celebrated for their skill, found themselves under hushed scrutiny, their colorful powders now viewed as potential hazards. Elinor observed the poetic absurdity, how the pursuit of beauty could embroil these refined women in such unspoken peril. Slowly, the vibrant palettes that once sparkled under candlelight dimmed, replaced by more muted, safer hues, as if the court itself recognized the thin boundary between allure and harm. Yet beneath this cautious change, the routine of vanity persisted, now tinged with an undercurrent of wary silence. With time, the court settled into a moment of calm, as the fears of poisoning waned and the initial curiosity was replaced by a shared, weary tranquility. Women resumed their grooming routines, touching their cheeks lightly, unaware or perhaps indifferent to the slow shift that had occurred. Elinor watched as their reflections flickered softly in polished surfaces, faces relaxed, and smiles faintly amused by the ongoing performances. Both social and personal, the atmosphere grew more subdued, marked by a quiet acknowledgement that human imperfection, hidden even beneath layers of polish, remained an unchangeable truth. Beauty, after all, was always a fleeting, fragile thing, touched by both artistry and absurdity. As Elinor slowly retreated from the court's softly humming chambers, she reflected on the timeless nature of these human rituals, vanity masked by routine, safety compromised by desire, and societal standards quietly guiding their gentle absurdities. Faces blurred in the dim glow of memory, shadows cast by unseen prophets or wise fools, all silently observing. The quiet dignity of their everyday pursuits, tinged with irony and gentle humor, reminded her that beneath the surface of appearances, life shifted in slow, unnoticed waves. Perhaps, in the end, it was only this silent, unending cycle of care and folly that kept human society quietly alive, softly resilient amidst the gentle absurdities of human imperfection. In a quiet medieval market town, the early morning light cast a soft glow over wooden stalls where merchants displayed jars of ointments, powders, and aromatic herbs. Women and men moved with measured gestures, applying washes and unguents, their faces often blurred behind veils of scented smoke and chalky pigments. It was a time when beauty and cleanliness intertwined with social standing. Each touch of rosewater or lead-based blanche whispering of dignity and virtue. Yet beneath this calm surface, the scattering of soot and unwashed linen hinted at a quiet, persistent neglect parts of daily life that slipped through the cracks of gaze and manners. All seemed routine, mundane even, as night's lingering shadows and the faint scent of herbs mingled in the cool air, unused to the coming unrest. Then suddenly, the whispers turned into a murmur of concern. The pestilence arrived, creeping silently through the alleyways and narrow streets. Faces once painted with pearl powder and touched by delicate creams now looked pale and gaunt, as sickness found its way through the gaps in the city's defenses, mostly, it seemed, where filth and unwashed hands lingered. Rumors spread faster than the illness, some blaming uncleanliness, others whispering about divine punishment, while the streets grew still, except for the distant clang of bells. Elinor and Rowan, two humble herbalists, watched the chaos unfold with quiet resolve, their minds fixed on simple remedies like herbal washes and regular washing that might slow the tide of suffering, but faced stiff resistance from those proud of their ornate appearances. The irony was sharp. The very masks people wore for beauty now hid the sickness lurking beneath. Amid the mounting fear, some villagers scoffed at the idea that mere soap, herb-infused water, or modest hygiene could stem such a formidable foe. The soapboxes of aesthetic pride still echoed with laughter and dismissive gestures, while Elinor and Rowan tirelessly distributed small bundles of herbal cleanser, their hands rough, yet gentle, their efforts often met with raised eyebrows. Why bother with simplicity when dignity seemed tied to ornamentation? The absurdity of it all was undeniable. In a society obsessed with appearances, the very practices that might save lives were dismissed as unworthy or dull, a loss of dignity, they argued, in the face of sickness. Still, as the city's walls strained under the weight of the unseen threat, some neighbors paused, witnessing the quiet persistence of those who dared to prioritize cleanliness over vanity. Gradually, a slow change unfurled, routines shifted, and small groups gathered around water basins with flickering candlelight, washing hands and faces beneath a tired sky. The smell of damp cloth and herbal infusions replaced some of the more pungent perfumes, while the silence of gradual effort replaced earlier dismissiveness. Elinor and Rowan, their faces now partly shadowed by exhaustion, observed the shifts with a faint, knowing humor. How strange it was that the simplest acts of hygiene, so commonplace and humble, began to feel like quiet acts of defiance. The city moved forward, hesitant and slow, as if awakening from a long, restful sleep. In these moments, the weight of human imperfections and stubbornness softened into something unremarkably human, a quiet acknowledgement of necessity and care. Looking back, the tale of that troubled time revealed a silent truth. In the midst of crisis, the smallest acts, washing, cleansing, tending, carried a subtle dignity of their own. The blurred faces behind their veils and smudges became quiet symbols of resilience, reminding observers that even in the most tired moments of history, human effort persisted, slightly ironic, quietly determined, and gently resistant to the absurdities of vanity. As the city slowly recovered, the lessons settled like dust on old wooden shelves. Cleanliness need not be ornate, and dignity could rest in simple routines rather than opulent masks. Life, as it often does, moved on a little wiser and infinitely more patient than before, with a faint, amused smile at human folly. In the gentle lull of post-plague days, the courts and townsfolk began to notice something new, a subtle shift in scent, cleanliness, and the faint gleam of freshly brushed hair. It was as if, amid the slow return of life's routines, the idea of personal care had found its quiet place amongst long-standing customs. The Queen, in her softer moments of reflection, declared that perhaps a cleaner society might offer a kinder, healthier future. Her modest decree invited artisans to produce non-toxic cosmetics and encouraged the building of communal baths, quiet places where steam and soap might mingle in silence. People still went about their days with familiar gestures, dabbing scented oils, washing their hands, yet now with a sense that these acts bore a new, gentle weight of virtue. As the reforms took root, a tension arose, an ironic dance between tradition and innovation. Some elders scoffed at the fuss over hygiene, dismissing it as vanity, while others withstood the change, clinging to old habits as if they were relics of a simpler, more honest time. Meanwhile, officials and merchants found themselves navigating this delicate landscape, sometimes hurriedly filling basins with warm water before market days, or offering fragrant powders with hesitant smiles. In these mundane moments, the society's unease was almost humorous, seeing cleanliness as both a moral virtue and a social ritual, yet always burdened by the lingering suspicion that it might be just another passing fad. Still, progress persisted quietly, like a distant hum beneath everyday life's gentle pulse. Irony persisted as the society's noblest virtue, cleanliness, began to be branded as a sign of dignity, yet often only emphasized how human shortcomings resisted perfect order. Public baths, once simple communal spaces, became symbols of modest pride, their tiled walls echoing the soft splashes of footsteps and whispered conversations. Masks of quiet respectability concealed deeper human flaws, odor, dust, and the ceaseless imperfections that lingered on skin and cloth. Some piously believed hygiene could bridge the gap between beauty and morality, but all understood that beneath the surface, human nature was slow to change. The scent of soap and the sight of wrapped bundles of linen offered comfort, yet also a gentle reminder that the stories of purity could never be fully consummated. In peaceful moments, people learned to accept these routines as part of life's gentle fabric, much like the wear of soft wool and the slow turn of the seasons. The city's quiet streets, lined with simple wash basins and weathered wooden benches, became corridors of calm, mundane yet purposeful. Elinor, once a cautious advisor, now found herself mediating between tradition and the growing desire for healthful living. Her face, often veiled in the diffuse glow of midday light, her words, slow and measured, helped bridge the old ways with new practices, fostering a sense of collective achievement in small, unremarkable acts. It was as if society's very heartbeat had begun to slow and soften around this new modest virtue, an understated, collective embrace of everyday cleanliness. And so, over time, the society's attitude toward hygiene softened into quiet acceptance, a subtle yet meaningful part of daily life. The once tentative reforms wove themselves into a broader sense of dignity, neither rushed nor perfect, simply ongoing. People moved through their routines with a gentle awareness that perhaps, in small gestures and modest habits, there lay a silent hope for a better, healthier future. Elinor's careful counsel and the Queen's quiet reforms had nudged a society toward humility in the face of human imperfection. Their faces often blurred by the soft light of dusk as they watched the everyday unfold. It was a story not of grand upheaval, but of slow, persistent change, an unassuming chapter in the ongoing human quest for simplicity and well-being. In the quiet dawn of the highlands of Karen, young Kale watched as the elder warriors settled around small fires, their skin glistening with oil as they prepared for the ritual. With steady, unhurried motions, they drew inked symbols on their arms and chests, the designs telling stories of conquest, wisdom, and survival. Metal needles tapped softly against bone hoops and studs as each piercing was carefully made, a tangible mark of endurance that felt both sacred and mundane. Kale's eyes narrowed slightly. He longed to wear such marks himself, believing they would make him more like the revered figures of his people. Yet, a flicker of hesitation passed across his face, an awareness of the pain he'd face to earn the same pride that adorned the elders' bodies. In this moment, amid the smoke and silence, the young apprentice quietly wished for courage that might not come so easily. As days passed and the rituals grew closer, a subtle tension settled within Kale. His classmates spoke of their upcoming rites with nervous excitement, their voices low and steady, like the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Kale found himself gazing at the elders' decorated bodies, wondering if the pain was truly worth the stories etched into skin, or the piercings that had tested their endurance. The irony lingered. He admired the symbols, yet feared the process, questioning whether true strength could come from accepting suffering so quietly. The tribe's quiet insistence on pain as a mark of honor began to seem both simple and strangely cruel, a ritual that demanded patience and surrender from the young. In these silent debates within himself, Cale's desire to prove his worth felt caught between admiration and a slow-growing reluctance. One evening, at the cusp of the full moon, Cale observed elders applying the ink, the needle puncturing skin with a rhythm that almost sounded like a heartbeat, steady, persistent. He watched their faces, some blurred by shadow, others barely moving, as if in a trance of routine. The piercing circle was quiet, no screams, no theatrical drama, only the subtle, almost bored sound of metal on flesh. It struck him how mundane, how ordinary the process seemed, given the importance placed upon it, as if pain itself could be rendered trivial in the endless flow of daily life. Ironically, these acts of body modification, which are so revered, appeared almost tedious in their repetition. Yet, beneath that, there was an undeniable beauty, a soft acknowledgement of the human capacity to accept hardship simply because it is part of becoming something greater. The day the tattoos were completed, Cale held his breath as he imagined the stories behind each symbol, each a silent testament to bravery or endurance, yet also a mark of time past and patience worn slowly away. As he watched the elders' faces, some with faint, sleepy smiles, he realized that the body was indeed a canvas, but one that required endless quiet work and acceptance. The tribe moved slowly in the late afternoon, the gentle sound of water and footsteps filling the air as they rested. The visual contrast between their decorated skin and the calm serenity of their expression made Cale feel a gentle weight, an understanding that perhaps strength was less about pain and more about the quiet dignity of enduring it. In that calm moment, he recognized the irony that what was once seen as a testament to heroism could simply be a series of quiet, everyday acts, worn willingly and without fuss. Later, as the camp settled into a peaceful dusk, Cale sat quietly among the elders, contemplating the marks of his people, the inked stories, the pierced ears and noses, each one a gentle reminder of a tradition that had endured through countless seasons. He understood now that these rituals were less about the pain itself and more about the collective silence shared in accepting what must be done. It was a slow, human act, wrapped in quiet humor and subtle irony, an imperfect way to aspire for greatness amid the mundane, daily rhythm of life. His own path, he realized, might never require the same marks. Yet, he could see that the strength in their quiet acceptance was something he could carry forward, perhaps in different, softer ways. The night grew darker, and in its slow, peaceful way, the highlands of Karen held the gentle weight of human stories, simple, imperfect, and beautifully unremarkable. In the soft glow of early dawn, Kale sat quietly in the shadowed hut, the air thick with the scent of oil and ink. Today was the day of the ink rite, a moment that promised both tradition and transformation. Lyra, the master tattooist, moved with a calm, practiced patience, her needle humming softly against Kale's bare back. The first sting was faint, quickly giving way to a dull ache that spread across the skin like a slow burn. As the design slowly emerges, a saga of the great hunt, Kale felt the weight of silent expectations settle into his bones, uncertain if he was ready for what it symbolized. Lyra's hand paused briefly, the needle still, as a tiny sigh escaped Kale's lips, hinting at a subtle shift within. Outside, the world continued its unhurried flow, children playing, elders sharing stories, unaware of the intense personal cost etched onto his skin. The design now stretching across his back resembled a wild, tangled map, a symbol of both honor and burden. Some tribe members eyed the work with admiration, others with faint skepticism, but all accepted it as the necessary path. Kale thought briefly of prophets and heroes, whose faces remained hidden behind veils, more mysterious, less burdened, wondering if perhaps his own understanding of strength was just as obscured by shadow. As the final strokes settled into his skin, Kale's body relaxed into a slow, measured stillness, the ache mellowing into a dull, distant pulse. The work was done, yet inside, a quiet calm had settled, as if the pain had smoothed away the last ripples of uncertainty. He looked at his reflection in a nearby pool of water, his back marked with the tribe's story, each line a testament to endurance. The whispers among his kin faded into the background, leaving only the sound of his own breath, slow and steady. For the first time in hours, there was a gentle sense of acceptance that perhaps the real battle was trying to understand oneself, not merely the challenge imposed by others. Later that evening, Kale sat among friends around a small fire, the glow casting soft shadows on his inked back. The tribe's stories circled in the gentle silence, some about past warriors, others about future fears, and he listened quietly, feeling the truth in their quiet humor and trivial irons. In this tranquil moment, he realized that the ritual had not made him a hero, nor had it buried his doubts. Instead, it had quietly reminded him that human strength often lay in quiet persistence, not in perfect images or external marks. The ink on his skin was just another small, imperfect story, like all stories, slow, mundane, and quietly meaningful in the way only history can be. And so, Kale's journey into the night continued, with the soft hum of acceptance as its quiet soundtrack. Long ago, in a quiet tribe nestled among rolling hills, the ritual of body modification was woven into daily life with a gentle seriousness. Young warriors, like Kale, watched as elders adorned their skins and faces with subtle ink patterns, each stroke carrying a quiet story. When the rival clan, the Vesh, arrived with a demand for tribute, the air grew heavier with anticipation. Though everyday routines persisted, the spinning of yarn, the sharing of meals, the soft clink of metal tools, Kale, proud but calm, felt the weight of tradition as he prepared for the challenge that would define his worth. It was not just strength, but patience and endurance that the tribe valued, and Kale understood these virtues quietly, beneath the surface of ceremony and calm. The Vesh's arrival brought a sharp tension to the everyday peace, their banners fluttering like distant thunder on the horizon. The challenge was announced without fanfare. Kale must endure the piercing of the eye, a ritual that would insert a silver ring into his brow, an act both small and monumental. As the moment approached, Kale sat still, feeling the cool metal against his skin and listening to the soft hum of distant voices. The ceremony was carefully explained by elders whose faces remained shadowed, their voices measured and unhurried. Amidst the quiet, Kale's muscles tensed slightly, not out of fear, but because the ritual held the quiet weight of generations and the fragile balance of honor the tribe sought to maintain. The irony was gentle, but undeniable. The ritual, meant to prove strength, was a careful dance with pain, a simple act that spoke of vulnerability cloaked in tradition. As the needle punctured flesh and the silver ring was slid into place, there was a moment of stillness that felt like both a beginning and an ending. Kale's face, calm yet slightly strained, reflected a quiet acceptance. The onlookers, many with tattoos and piercings of their own, watched in hushed respect, recognizing the quiet absurdity of it, all the effort to appear unbreakable when the body, after all, was meant to bend and yield. Kale's gaze remained steady, blinking slowly. As the ceremony drew to a close in the muted light of dusk, with the ring in place, Kale felt an unexpected calm settle over him, a slight hum beneath his skin that was both strange and familiar. The tribe's people resumed their daily routines, sharing food, tending fires, exchanging gentle stories, content in the rhythm of ordinary life. The dramatic moment had passed, leaving behind only a faint metallic glow and a sense of quiet achievement. Kale's reflection in the water was still, eyes partially obscured by the shadow of the ring, embodying a subtle irony. What was intended as a test became a part of everyday resilience rather than a grand spectacle. Life moved on as it always does, carrying within it the soft humor of human effort and the unspoken acknowledgement of their imperfect strength. As night fell, the tribe settled into their simple routines, the strange ritual now a quiet chapter in their history. Kale, lying beneath a woven blanket, listened to the gentle sounds of crickets and distant voices, feeling the weight of the ring as a reminder of belonging and endurance. The ritual had, in its own quiet way, highlighted the universal human tendency to seek meaning in small acts, to find identity in tradition, even when such rituals seem oddly mundane. Perhaps, in the end, the tribe's modifications, tattoos, piercings, war paint, were merely stories written softly on skin, reminders of who they were and what they endured. Calmly, they drifted into sleep, the world outside slowly slipping into silence, leaving only the faint echo of a ritual that was neither grand nor trivial, simply human. Long ago, in a time when warriors sought to embody their identities through scars, ink, and piercings, the sunlit plains were a place of quiet tradition. As dawn's faint light brushed the grass, Kale, a figure known for his calm demeanor, prepared for what seemed an ordinary day. Yet today, he carried vivid tattoos that traced the stories of generations on his arms and chest. The tribe's elders had often spoken softly about these markings, which symbolized strength and belonging, while his silver ring reflected the faint morning sun. The distant rumble of hooves and soft whispers of wind felt familiar. Life moved at a gentle, steady pace. Little did he suspect that these quiet symbols would soon mark him as a leader in a surprise confrontation, shining quietly like a worn shield in softened sunlight. As the Vesh warriors suddenly appeared on the horizon, the air grew tense and charged with the weight of anticipation. Kale's tattoos seemed to darken slightly, as if responding to the surge of adrenaline. The clash of whispers and steel on steel punctuated the still air. Yet there was an odd stillness beneath the chaos, an underlying irony in how human efforts to assert dominance often dissolved into wandering moments of hesitation. Kale's comrades, their faces calm and focused, adjusted their armor and peered into the dust clouds rising beyond the plains. They knew tradition had little meaning in these brief, unpredictable hours, yet they called upon it nonetheless to steady, trembling hands. The quiet hum of their breathing was almost louder than the shouted commands, a reminder that life often moved in small, deliberate gusts rather than grand currents. The fighting intensified, and the dull reality of bodily adornments, piercings shimmering with sweat, tattoos smeared with dust, became almost comical in their stubborn visibility. Kale's body bore the full story of his tribe's ideals, where warriors often prided themselves on scarred skin or inked symbols. that seemed to mock the fleeting nature of victory. When Kale finally faced the Vesh champion, the clash unfolded as a slow dance of mutual acknowledgement. Each scar, each ring a silent testament to sacrifices made in calmer days. The ironies lingered in how these markings, meant to inspire awe, sometimes seemed worn thin by the endurance of ordinary wounds. As the dust settled, there was no clear winner, only the quiet awareness that the true war was often fought beyond the clash, in the small, faithful moments of human persistence. With the Vesh retreating into the distance, the sun dipped lower, casting a warm, diffuse glow over the plains. Kale's chest heaved gently beneath his tattoos, each line a quiet echo of the storm that had passed. As he and his comrades moved away from the battleground, the weight of the conflict settled into a gentle calm, something almost meditative, like the slow closing of a book after a long day. The ritual of healing and quiet reflection took place as they tended to minor wounds, the sound of slow breathing filling the space left behind by chaos. Their bodies, marked and wearied, held stories that no longer seemed urgent, but simply part of their quiet human fabric. Here, at the edge of memory and moment, the violence felt like a distant echo, softened by the slow passage of time. In the muted light of evening, the warriors gathered around a small fire, their faces softly lit and relaxed in quiet companionship. The tattoos and piercings were now just details in the slow, gentle night, reminders of a time when bodies told stories so loudly they almost forgot what peace sounded like. As Kale looked at his reflection in a small bowl of water, the scars and ink blended into the backdrop of ordinary human imperfection, subtly humorous in their permanence. There was a gentle nostalgia in knowing that all their efforts to shape the body were fleeting body modifications, ideals, and battles, all part of a long, slow dance with time itself. The world continued, unbothered and patient, as everyone settled into the simple rhythm of another ordinary night, quietly aware of how human stories drifted like soft clouds across the endless sky. When Kale first returned to his village after the long and arduous campaign against the Vesh, his skin bore a patchwork of scars, some faint, others bold and revealing. These marks, once perceived as warnings or badges of fearsome strength, now seemed to carry a quiet dignity, woven into the everyday fabric of his presence. Villagers, gathered around fires or resting in shade, listened as he recounted stories of the fight, fingers tracing the lines that matched the tales of sacrifice. It was a slow awakening, the realization that body modifications could serve not solely as intimidation, but as living histories. The air felt cool and quiet, emphasizing how these marks had become part of a calm, ongoing story of resilience. Human imperfection clung softly to memory. Neither heroism nor shame fully overtaking the muted hum of ordinary life. Over time, the tribe began to re-examine what these markings meant, seeing them less as mere symbols for fear or dominance, and more as artifacts of personal growth. Younger members, curious and tentative, questioned whether ink or piercing might someday tell their own stories, not just mark their bodies as warnings to enemies. An elder, with a hand resting gently on a threadbare garment, pointed out that each scar and jewel had once been deliberate choices. A voice whispering of transformation rather than static strength, yet the irony lingered like a distant hum. The same bodies once decorated for intimidation, now celebrated for individuality. The quiet village seemed to pause, pondering the subtle change, as the familiar warmth of community settled comfortably around these new perspectives. Spears and shields remained, but sat quieter. The focus slowly shifted inward, upon the stories etched into human flesh. As the village adapted, the notion of beauty and strength shifted, embracing these modifications as stories rather than signs of conquest. Some warriors replaced their intimidating symbols with delicate designs or simple piercings, finding comfort in small revisions. An old storyteller, his face blurred by a softly glowing lamp, mused about the folly of permanence in such fleeting life. How a scar could fade or a piercing could be removed, but the memory persisted. The irony, slipping quietly into their reflections, was that their bodies had become more flexible, more fluid, and somehow more honest in their imperfection. The sound of soft footsteps on dirt paths and the gentle rustle of garments underscored a slow, peaceful acceptance. Those marks no longer defined the warrior, but complemented the ongoing story of human change. A faint breeze stirred the last echoes of old fears, replaced by patient understanding. In the calm after this cultural shift, the community found a gentle rhythm, honoring their bodies not just for their appearance, but as living chronicles. Children would trace faint lines and tiny piercings in the reflective moments of day, imagining their own stories yet to be told. The older warriors, some with no visible scars at all, looked on with amused patience, as if their bodies had quietly learned to speak without words. The village's collective breath slowed further, a soft recognition that strength came as much from patience and acceptance as from any outward sign. The old prophet's face, often shadowed or blurred in the fading twilight, seemed to smile, not judging, but quietly observing the ongoing continuum. Here, in this reminder of human imperfection, there was a subtle truth. The history of a person was written more by their quiet existence than by any embellishment. In the quiet moments of reflection, the villagers understood that the legacy of adornment was ultimately about finding their own definitions of the ideal. On their re-airing terms, Cale, now more with stories than scars, stood among the younger generation, his face relaxed and unfocused, as if surrendering to the slow march of time and change. The village had become a place where body modifications no longer carried a fixed meaning, but floated gently in the collective memory, like echoes of old stories resting peacefully. The simple act of living, eating, resting, talking had become the true adornment, more real than any ink or jewel. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, warm shadows, the faint hum of human imperfection lingered in the air, a quiet reminder of how subtle beauty and enduring strength are often woven through calm acceptance and gentle irony. With time, the initial novelty of foreign silks and tighter cuts pressed into a kind of tired familiarity. The exotic became quietly ordinary, like a whispered joke overheard in passing. Aldrich noticed how the courtiers began to adapt these styles into their routines, unaware of how their garments quietly mirrored the shifting sands beneath the throne. The irony was tangible. What once felt like a deliberate act of display now edged into everyday dullness, a fixture of courtly life. The fabrics, once striking in their foreign brightness, seemed to dull in tone, blending into the subdued palette of perpetuity. Yet, amid the mundane, a distant, almost humorous sense lingered that the court's fashion was less an act of choice than a slow, inevitable drift, like a sail settling in calm waters. By late afternoon, the sun cast long, lazy shadows across the courtyard as the tournament reached its climax. A mise stitch in the heraldic banner, an error small and insignificant on paper, became a focal point of absurdity, drawing attention like a stray thread unraveling in silence. The herald, usually a silent figure in the background, was suddenly embroiled in heated debate, arguing over colors that had blurred just enough to challenge established notions. The irony was palpable, a simple mistake, woven into the fabric of tradition, now threatened the delicate balance of social display. Aldrich, observing quietly, saw the slow rise of human folly, where pride and precision collided in a tapestry of unintended comedy. And yet, beneath the surface, life carried on, faintly amused, quietly resigned. In the end, Aelred concluded that history, much like her hair, was tangled and subtle, its true essence not always visible in surface symbols, but felt most in moments of stillness and ordinary life. The village's modest existence persisted, comfortable in its unremarkable rhythms, untouched by superficial crowns or edicts. Perhaps, she thought, the truest nobility lay in the simple acts and shared silences, the kind that quietly endured beyond fleeting symbols of status. As she brushed her hair before sleep, she wondered if the old tradition of deep-rooted kinship might still linger somewhere beneath the veneer of rules and appearances, just waiting for someone quiet enough to notice. And with that gentle thought, she drifted into a peaceful, undisturbed sleep, the world outside still and softly breathless. As midday wore on, the market's tone shifted subtly. The merchants, now more insistent, displayed their wares with a sort of measured pride. Nobles fussed over their elaborate powders, some of which shimmered unnaturally, while peasants showed modest, almost resigned appreciation for simple cloths or herbal washes. A merchant called out, offering lead-based face paint, a mixture that glinted disturbingly under the weak sun, yet was still sought after by those eager to emulate noble fashion. Elinor's gaze lingered on the contrast, the shimmering beauty of the wealthy, often touched with dubious substances, and the straightforward practicality of the humble, who simply sought clarity and cleanliness. It was as if society's hungers for status were laid bare, painted in broad strokes of irony upon the marketplace's waking canvas. Midway through the ritual, Cale's breaths grew shallow as the needle pressed deeper, tracing lines that etched not just ink, but the hopes of his tribe. Whispered words drifted in the breeze outside about leadership, bravery, and the strength required for war. His skin protested with each insistent prick, nerves tangling with doubt, as sweat slicked his brow, and the horizon beyond blurred in his vision. The tribe's unspoken demand that only those with full marks could lead felt like a quiet pressure pressing against his chest, whispering that weakness could be seen in every tremor. Yet beneath the pain, a slow irony whispered, perhaps true strength was in knowing exactly where one's limits truly lay.